Yeah, I should stop.
Sorry.
Triples.
It's not.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, it is,
Yeah.
it is 4 p.m., so we will call to order the Thursday, October 24th, 2024 Septic Review Subcommittee meeting. Please note that this is a hybrid meeting and that the in-person meeting will not be suspended or terminated if technological problems interrupt the remote connection. So first, we'll do a roll call and introduce staff and members of the board. I'll start here. Thor Akerley, Board of Health member.
Eric Kaplan, Board of Health member.
Fred Cowan, consultant.
Dave Sargent, consultant.
Joe Rosa, Chair of the Board of Health.
Gabrielle White, Assistant Health Director.
Cody Smith, sanitary.
Dominique Curley, Health Director.
Marco Pellizzolo, Board member.
First up is the approval of the September 26th, 2024 Septic Review Subcommittee minutes.
I move that we accept the September 26th, 2024 minutes.
Oh, second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Motion passes.
Do a roll call.
Oh, I suppose we do. So Thor, yes.
Eric, yes.
Marco, yes.
All right, then we have public questions for 2 minutes, I assume. Dana, Chris, don't have anything?
Let me just see if there's anybody online.
Is anyone online?
Second.
Or do you happen to know the winning lottery number tonight? That's my question.
How much is it? Need a time
We have
machine.
no other attendees but the panelists that are already on, so.
Okay,
All
right.
I don't even do it.
we'll move to 4 Wilson Road, variance request. Dana Ottenheimer.
Mr. Chairman and subcommittee members, 3 distinguished staff members from the health department. We got quite the audience today. So as you know, I'm Dan Ottenheimer, engineer with Mill River Consulting. With me is Chris McCarthy. Chris is the general contractor coordinator for the project at 4 Wilson Road. This might be familiar to you because we've been before you in the past and you have granted relief, and we're looking to slightly adjust or somewhat adjust 2 of the tanks. So that's what we're here for today. So overall, this is the property. They had a very advanced soil absorption, pressure distribution soil absorption system here, which we're keeping intact. It's surrounded by snow fence during the construction process, but there was a house located here. They're in the process of, or they have removed that, and they're going to be building a new house over here. In the eyes of Title V, as we all know, this is considered an upgrade. It's the same number of bedrooms. We're not increasing the bedrooms. It's a different location, slightly different footprint, but this is an upgrade. And we're not actually even upgrading the soil absorption system, just the tanks, the septic tank and the treatment tank. So we came before you 6, 8 or so months ago to put the tanks in this general, in this general area over here, and needed several variances for that, and the board kindly granted those. It's in the process of seeing the site layout and its configuration. It really makes a lot of sense from several reasons, which I'll describe, to have the tanks much closer to the house. So that's what we're here today to ask for your consideration of possibly moving the tanks closer to the house. With that, they are also closer to the coastal bank as well and the flood zone. So that's part of what we're going to be discussing today. So moving them to this location has an advantage and also a greater variance that we're seeking. So the one advantage is there is a drain line that cuts right through over here. And previously we had the tanks on the other side of that drain line. And so the sewage had to go back from the house to the septic tank and then back over that drain line at any point in time. And that's the approved configuration that we have now. If some point in the future there's some settling and any of those pipes have separation, we would then run the risk of having effluent potentially following this drain pipe and heading right out to the beach. So that is the downside, I would say, of keeping with the current approved configuration. The upside is we would move them so that we're not crossing this drain line at all, so we don't have that as an issue. The downside from a regulatory perspective is we are proposing to be closer to the coastal bank and the flood zone than we were previously. So that's what we're asking for your consideration. So that's kind of the project in a nutshell. The tanks are identical to what you had previously approved. Everything else is identical. It's just the location of these two tanks. Chris has been GCing this project, making sure the existing house was safely removed without any impact to the beach down here. And they've dug out for the foundation of the new house. So he knows this property very, very well.
So I'll just give my 2 cents. Obviously, there's a lot of ledge that had to be removed that was there, and if you being familiar with the site, and I'm the general contractor basically for the site work, there's ledge everywhere. A lot of blasting here, and there's ledge that runs up here right beside the garage down about 4 feet right underneath where that drain line is. And sort of dug and scratched against the ledge here, and knowing that we'd have to get a tank on this side of the driveway. I believe the ledge climbs right up there, look across the street, it climbs up even further, that we'd have to blast. At a minimum, probably 2 to 3 feet of ledge. And it's surrounded, part of what we tried to be mindful of, it's really the only place on the tree where there's some, call it mature growth, some trees for one of the tanks, and the other one, the other tank here, the Waterloo tank, I think is going here. And similar, would have to dig down, and I didn't dig down over here to see if there was ledge, but my guess would be as it continues to climb up and there's ledge over here, that we're going to have to blast to get the tank down at least 6 feet there as well, to meet all of the requirements. And we just, I think would end up losing a tree, which has been an important part of the Conservation Commission to try to save, and not disturb too much. So at digging out the rest of the foundation here, I said, well, it was really my idea to say to the owner, I said, I think it might be a good idea. I did some sort of test digging over here and was able to get down to the depth that would be required for the tanks. And I suggested that he call Dan and say, I think this might be a better idea where we don't have to run it across the driveway, might have to blast, probably kill these bunches of trees and put it where it's already been disturbed. And that's, I think, why we're here. And whatever precautions that Dan can come up with, even if it's putting another mill barrier around the outside of that, or a double, if they have a double wall type pipe or something to make it safer, I'd probably, from a common sense standpoint, say that might be a good idea to do. We'll put into the design if they do that, that's all. So it wasn't Dan's idea, it was mine. So.
It's all good.
It's less work for it's less work, but I just think it makes more sense, and
The leaching field is not changing,
Lead field not changing.
which is the yellow.
That's in yellow, correct, yeah.
Have they started any of the septic work out there, or is it just the house? at this point?
Just we're just putting it in the corner of the house, yeah. That'd be, we put in the tanks when they're backfilling.
May I ask, so Dan, what's the existing system there? What's being put into the leach field? What quality?
Right,
Is it
so
secondary treatment?
it is, what was approved and built and in operation for many years was a secondary treatment unit, and we're gonna replace it with a new one, a Waterloo biofilter.
Yeah, okay, good. Following your advice that we shouldn't be putting Presby systems into
I don't think I could say that on the public record.
sorry, that was.
But he feels it.
So I guess I'd just like to add, so Dan went over the variances that they're asking for. And so they're asking for both the tanks basically to be, or located within, the first one is request to have a tank 6 feet of the coastal resource area where 100 feet is required. Then the request to have a tank 6 feet of the coastal bank where 25 feet is required. And Dan kind of went over the reasons, just so it's a little bit more clear to everyone here. This is the original plan, that was proposed. And so. You know, you can see here along this line here, this is where it's crossing the drain line twice that Dan was talking about and where he's concerned about it. When I asked Dan about why he originally placed the tanks here and instead of what would to me be the more logical location. You know, kind of closer to the house, even closer to the bank, if you're asking for a variance. He had just mentioned that basically the landscape architect didn't want to look at the manholes. And so, you know, cause I wouldn't want, you know, I could see how some designers might come before the board and get one variance to get somewhat closer and then kind of just keep asking for variances to get closer and closer through redesign processes. So I think it's important to understand like, you know, why this is now the third time he's come forward and we've gotten kind of closer each inevitable time and to understand the backstory, I think is important. And so really it was an aesthetic choice. I stopped out to the site and took a look. I mean, the site is kind of a barren wasteland, except for the mature trees that are here and here. It's been blasted and ripped apart and, I mean, they're in compliance, but I do think that there is some merit to keeping some type of mature natural growth on the site and not replanting and blasting an already sensitive ecosystem. So I did, you know, note that on the new plan, right now, we're only 6 feet away from the coastal bank. There is a walkway and some other things to consider, but it seems like the tanks could get scooted closer to the leach field itself. And we're only talking maybe an additional 5 feet, but it might be something to consider on whether or not they can be moved. Like I said, they're gonna have to potentially redesign the stone. I don't know if that's an existing stone wall that's out there that in lightly in gray or not, but there is the walkway that was proposed, and so it's gonna move the tanks into that walkway area, and so. You guys can speak to that, and let the board know if you think that's a feasible option, but if we do slide the tanks, we do get a couple more feet out of it. Moving it closer and
What's
we're
the
able to
depth of
maintain.
groundwater there?
We're well above, groundwater in this area is gonna follow the top of ledge for the most part,
Okay, sure.
and so, we're well above it, They did also have so, and then as far as the coastal bank and close to that flood zone. The site has undergone, instead of the FEMA polygons, that they typically apply to the coastline, this applicant. Hired an outside consultant to do a review where they reduced it from, I think, 32 to 24. And so they've kind of identified and looked at least the hazard to know that this particular site, we're above the flood zone itself. And so I think with blasting considerations, and environmental impact of just sensitive things there, I think that the new proposed tank locations, is a kind of a valid request. The coastal bank here is all rock too. It's not sand that's gonna wash away. So.
Cody, when you went out there to the site visit, was the existing field, was it fenced off?
The existing field is fenced off. The fencing is kind of flopped around. It could be staked a little bit better. But there is orange fencing around it. Like I said, it's fallen down in a couple sections. I think it's gonna be important during the construction process to, you know, keep identifying that. As well as, you know, something the conservation might, if we're moving the tanks to protect these trees, maybe we should have snow fencing around the sensitive tree areas as well.
Okay.
But that's not for this board.
Right. I think it's very unusual and makes sense to move the tanks there, because, you know, there isn't ledge. And, you know, if you're blasting, you could disrupt that little drain line and everything else could really impact even the existing soil absorption system. So I think this makes a lot of sense. Keeping it where it is, if you have to bring in more fill to cover the tanks, makes sense rather than to bring it back this way, because, you know, you can deal with it. I'm not a landscape architect, but at least I could, you know, figure that this is a better place than what was proposed before.
Dan, could I ask, is there fuel on the property?
Is there what?
Fuel on the property?
Currently, there's nothing there.
There's a machine, there's an excavator.
Oh,
on the
I'm
machine.
sorry, yes.
And what do you plan for heat, for example? Is it all electric?
I don't know, do you?
I think, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure it's gonna be a multi-electric heating type heat pump system, I guess. I'm guessing. My younger brother's doing the building,
Right.
so.
Because my question is, if there would be fuel on site, if it was gas, we might consider putting in a generator.
Yeah.
In order to run your system.
Oh, I see, I see, yeah, I see where you're going.
You're so far at the end that if there's a power failure,
Yeah.
it'd be last.
Correct. So we do have ample emergency storage inside the tank, but it is a great suggestion. We'll certainly talk to the owners. Knowing them, I'm
I would
sure there's
guess
gonna be a
Yeah,
generator.
they'd probably put one in with a new house, because it'd
Right.
probably be all electric. I
Yeah.
think that's what
With a generator
yeah,
that would run on
Propane.
propane.
propane,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. So we'll talk to them about making sure the septic is tied into that as well.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Anyone else have any other comments or questions? I definitely agree. I think when you take the site into whole consideration, everything is substantially better as well. In terms of the house location and
take a look.
everything. So yeah, someone wants to make a motion. I would motion to approve the variances as requested for 4 Wilson Road.
Second
All in favor?
discussion.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Thor, yes?
Eric, yes.
Marco, yes.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good.
I'm gonna stick around, Thor, if there's anything later on the agenda, I can help any. Chris, take care.
Hi, Chris. Hi, see you.
See you later, Chris.
All right.
Good one.
Next up is One Bond Road, transfer station discussion. I'm sorry, 91 Winker Road, which was next, has been struck from the agenda. And
They had, you mind if they were not necessarily fully prepared to be here today and had some folks out of town, so they decided to move forward to another time.
I just reviewing it.
Pardon me?
I just reviewed it online.
Ah,
It'll be back.
well, it will be back, yeah.
Is there more office time required because of this delay?
No.
No, good.
all right, we'll skip to One Bond Road, septic transfer station discussion.
Yeah, so what I'm looking to do is, Ronnie Strong is in the room, he just came in.
Oh, hi, Ronnie.
And so from the board tonight, I've requested that Ronnie Strong come before the Board of Health for just a ruling and some guidance regarding a septic transfer station. And so what I'm looking from the board tonight is some possible technical feedback from people who won't be at the Board of Health meeting in regards to the septic transfer station. So Ronnie Strong has been operating a septic transfer station since, about 1974 in the Gloucester area. We don't have a lot of records on file of the permitting process throughout that time.
Explain what it is.
Yeah, so the septic transfer station, basically, septic trucks that are bringing their effluent here, either on the weekends for emergency calls or in the winter for half-full trucks. And then one of the tanks is also stored for grease, so the accumulation of grease. So they're transferring from the trucks to these temporary storage tanks. Then these temporary storage tanks are then transferred back into a larger truck that then moves to, potentially another wastewater treatment plant. In this case, it goes down, Wind River is the sole operator on this site, where in the past, there's been other companies that have utilized it before the wastewater treatment plant was in existence. And so the site used to exist as 3 typical fuels, like fuel storage trailers that you'd see pulled behind a fifth wheeler. So that was their before, and then, they had like a permanent holding tank and these frac tanks that they have now. Replace those systems. And Title V doesn't allow for a permanent structure for a septic transfer station. So in 2022, the Board of Health heard the hearing about removing the existing stationary tank and approve the use of the frac tanks. And so the frac tank, so the board knows, is basically, it's a big dewatering tank that has wheels on it. It's not designed to move down the road with liquid in it. But it is meant to store liquid or fuel, or they use them for lots of different materials. So it's used to store materials temporarily on site. They call them frac tanks because typically they're used in dewatering applications where they are letting things settle out. And so currently on site, there's 2 frac tanks that are there. They are 18,000 gallon tanks. They are stationary. They're located at the back of One Pond Road. So you can kind of see them in this back corner of the yard. And so Wind River is the only one operating on site now. They've been the only one operating for a long time, but Ronnie Strong, because he is the landowner and rents his property to Wind River, has been the one who pulled the permit. I don't know if we should necessarily continue. That's one of the things that I'm looking for guidance from the board. You know, is who the permit should be pulled by. Should it be pulled by the property owner or by the one who's actually operating the tanks?
It's been both. Both names have been on the permit.
Right, both names, your name's on the permit, but Wind River's trucks are all the ones that are registered on the permit.
Right.
So, so just to, show the board a little bit closer, this is the front of the 2 tanks. The blue tank is used as a grease storage. The gray tank is used for their wastewater. So typically, and I can go through, but on the gray tank here, you can see the green hose that's coming out. The fill valve, or this is the emptying valve here on the bottom. And so they're gonna fill it from the other side. When they go to fill up the bigger trucks, they basically will hook their trucks up to this valve, open it up, and the back pulls the contaminant out, or not the contaminant, the wastewater, sorry. So that's kind of how they're basically taking the liquid out. So the valve to empty it, the back, this is their valves to fill it, real simple system, it pushes it out. The trucks, when they are emptying into the frac tanks, tend up blowing a lot of air afterwards to make sure that they're cleaned out. And there's not a lot of spillage, but I'll kind of go over that in a second. So this is just kind of overview of the tanks. This is the blue grease tank, the fill valve and the empty tank valve are both on the backside. And so what I'm looking for, and then one of the briefs, so these tanks are located both in a flood zone and within a wetland buffer. So there are things to consider. And so the guidance that I'm looking for today is whether or not we we issue this permit, so so we can issue it, but right now Ronnie Strong's not meeting 2 of the criteria of the permit that weren't necessarily brought to his attention in 2022, but they were put on the letter that he received that he would follow Gloucester on-site regulations. And so currently our regulations state that these tanks need to have spill containment and they need to maintain logbooks. So during a site visit, and you can see from these pictures, these tanks are just sitting on gravel. So there isn't spill containment on there, and they indicated that they could generate logbooks based off of trucking logs, but that there was no logbooks currently. Rob, the operator there, has since started maintaining logbooks. Really we're in the wetland buffer, we are. In that flood zone and we're on gravel, so my goal, or what I think is with this septic transfer station, we need to get it into compliance with spill containment. Because there's these valves, or this one valve. If failed, you know, we have 18,000 gallons that is just gonna run out into the marsh. Or run out onto the site and then down into the marsh, because we're only about 50 feet from the Phragmites. And so we need to kind of figure out what that spill containment should look like, and that's kind of some of the guidance I'm looking for. What the log books should look like is also some of the guidance that I'm looking for. So, you know, aspects that I've talked to Ron about, and Ron is open, and he can speak after I'm done. He's open to, you know, trying to build a spill containment that, you know, will work for this, that everyone's happy with. He wants to continue operating the septic transfer station. So when I talked to the manufacturer about these tanks, because I wanted to talk with them about whether or not the tanks are spec for this, what their recommendations are. The tanks are indeed, I mean, they're spec for multitudes of different fuels. And he said as long as our fuels, water, all types of different things. And so said as long as the acidity isn't too bad, or the pH isn't crazy off, and typically septic pH is a range between 6 and 8. You know, you're not gonna get any crazy corrosion. They do sell a product currently for spill containment for these, and so it's basically a huge tarp that rolls out. And then the sides come up about a foot. And, you know, so that surrounds the tank itself, and so there could be one of those for each tank. Or we could potentially, you know, design something similar. So where, you know, it's made out of asphalt or made out of concrete, or what, yeah, I mean, it just has to be some type of impervious surface. And then, you know, because it's in the wetland buffer, they'd have to. Whatever, you know, would have to go in front of the Conservation Commission as well and meet their standards. So.
Can I have one more thing?
Yeah.
So he's currently not permitted, right? Because we have to renew the permit, so currently it's not permitted operation, fair? So
Yeah,
it's going for renewal,
Right,
and the permit requirements say that you do have a logbook and you do have a barrier, which there is none. So Cody right now cannot permit him because he does not have these pieces in place. So I want you guys to all be aware of that. You've covered it, but you sort of covered it in pieces. I wanted to sure that was the setup, and then he would come before the board with your recommendation for, you know, do they not feel that he is allowed to operate? You know, given that it is in fact not a mobile structure, you know, how's the board feeling about that now? And then also, if, you know, does the board, is the board aligned with whatever recommendation you might come up with that describes how he might mitigate?
so. Ron, do you
Fair
have
problem?
anything to add, Ron?
We have almost the whole
I
thing
think
now.
you've done an excellent job explaining what's there. The history of it, the way it happened was, George Riley was in charge of the sewer department at the time, and Artel Crowley was in charge of the Board of Health at the time. And where all the pump trucks used to dump was at Pump Station 1 by the State Fish Pier. And they cut off dumping there, so we had tractor trailers, so we bought a tank. And we were bringing our trucks back, and then there was Clean Right, Mari, Balsarini, RF Lane. I think there was one other, and they had small trucks, they had 1,000 and 1,500 gallon trucks. So they asked me if I would let them dump into our tanks, so everybody was on an equal playing ground, because we basically had the trailers to take it away, and so that's how it started, and been continuous for the last 50 years or so, and we've had no incidents there as well. And as far as its location where it was picked, that's where it was picked with George and Artel. And I can throw a rock at the sewer treatment plant, so I think they knew where that was going, so I think that's how they picked that spot. So that's, I'll answer any questions anybody has that Cody hasn't explained or I haven't explained.
And but the sewer treatment plant does have giant flood walls now, but. so
And,
then- yeah.
and in 22, I thought we were in compliance when Max came over and then Leslie got in, and at the end was the permanent tank they want to remove, so we removed the permanent tank, which did have a earthen barrier around it. And nothing was said about containment at the time, and the logbook, I'm not sure on that, and Rob,
Yeah.
talk to Rob.
So if you look at the enforcement letter, so that you need to basically comply with Gloucester onsite wastewater regulations. And that's written in Gloucester onsite regulations.
And which I have no problem doing.
Right.
And that's been a contractor's yard since the Civil War.
And I remember that.
We were there, right there.
Which side?
I just think that the presentation you gave, Cody, plus, what I looked at with the Google Drive was very well done. And Ron, I think the first time it was permitted was probably 2002. And I asked Ron to get permitted and he was very compliant with that. And I think it makes a lot of sense to have the logbook and the spill containment. I'm wondering if there can be a temporary spill containment until a permanent one like we're talking about coming, because it's important to have this service, if you will, so that people don't look for other ways of disposing their septic, on weekends. And
Right,
I was going to say that as well.
Well, it's only one operator.
it's only one operator, so I don't think other operators would necessarily run into trouble on the weekends per se, but. I think that if we move to do a temporary spill containment, I think while we're trying to figure out a permanent structure. The products that the tank manufacturer sells is something that we could consider. They're fairly inexpensive, Ron, he quoted me $1,200 verbally over the phone. But the difficulty in getting that spill containment in, and I think some type of spill containment would work, is in order to get the spill containment, those devices deployed, they can't be deployed on gravel because they're just gonna get poked holes on them. The tanks would have to be emptied. And then to move these tanks is nothing short of a large feat. They're kind of, in a lot of ways, these group frac tanks are a real gray area. They have wheels on them, they can move down the road. But they don't move very well. And so like it's a process to get them jacked down and then moved. And so but I think if we need to operate until we can or get some type of timeline, I'm not too sure what that timeline would be. Ronnie could certainly pump those, it's on them to put spill containment down, so. The temporary spill containment, they'd have to find some way for if they went with those poly barriers, to not have it get pierced by the gravel. When they put it down, whether or not that be some. Yeah.
Sand.
Right. I guess you're right, yeah.
I just wanna, if you don't mind, I just wanna call one thing out. Our regulations say that there can be no permanent structures, and these are permanent structures. They're not going anywhere. They're not moving, they're not coming in and going out, they're permanent. They have wheels on them, but they can't be moved full. So in your consideration, I think it's really important that we know that, we're going through a process right now, looking at our regulations. And I don't know if that defies Title V, by the way, as well, in terms of permanent versus,
They can move, so technically they're not out of compliance with Title V.
okay? So I just wanted to call that out, that,
I think they dealt with that in previously, and that's why there were wheels on them.
Yes,
And Max, Leslie were okay with both.
yeah, I remember.
Okay, so again, think about like what the spirit of the law is, and I'm not for or against this, I just want to be sure we're considering it in full. The spirit of the law is that there's nothing sitting there, right, that is sitting right inside of that buffer zone and also you know, a permanent transfer station, and then theoretically it moves, it rolls, and transfer stations are designed to be, a truck pulls up, it fills up, it moves on. It's not a permanent thing, like, that's the spirit of what the legislation is doing, and that is not this. Right? They're permanent
Could I ask,
with wheels on them.
are these sensitive to external temperature? What happens if it's 0 for 10 days?
I mean, they can freeze, they can freeze a little bit. I mean, the liquid inside, it's a large mass. I mean, if you see in this photo,
In terms of, I'm thinking particularly the valves.
yeah, so if you see in this photo, see this propane tank? This propane tank's attached to a weed burner. The weed burner is essentially just a propane torch. I'm sure that propane tank is sitting there because in the winter, the valve freezes. So when it freezes, in order to transfer liquid out, and once again, I'm inferring this based on the drawing, based on the picture. They have to heat up that valve in order to open it up, and so they use the propane torch to de-thaw the ice in order to open the valve to empty the tank.
That's why there should be a spill containment, right?
Right, and then on site, I mean, underneath that valve, there is evidence of some spillage, not like gross contamination, but you can see that things definitely spill.
Right, even pumping out septic tanks that sometimes there's a little bit of
Yeah.
spillage, right? Yeah, there should be a,
Does the grease not go solid, therefore it could not be able to be moved, pump, I'm showing my ignorance here.
I don't know. So,
Can you pump out a grease tank in the wintertime?
Excuse me?
Can you pump out a grease tank in the wintertime?
Yes, they can, but they mostly, they have their own treatment plant. I believe it's in Carver, Mass.
Yeah.
And I believe in the winter, on the grease, that's like you're saying, I think they bring it right from the restaurant to Carver.
So the grease tank could be emptied before winter,
Yes.
therefore, all right, that is half of your risk gone.
right,
Thank
so
you.
if that, because I wouldn't expect this permit process to happen very fast as far as getting something drawn up. Cause I think that whatever permanent structure gets drawn up should, you know, probably have like an engineering, either like a registered sanitarian stamp on it or something along those lines, or an engineer's stamp on it. So that the city knows that, like, cause I can't really, I mean, I can look at a plan, but I'm not an engineer to know that like what they're proposing is adequate. I mean, I know what.
Party evaluated.
Yeah, so we could either have a third party evaluate it, an engineer can stamp it. I do think that, I mean, if the manufacturer is selling a spill containment with a 1-foot barrier, I think that that's at least a kickoff spot. Because it's a product that they're selling with their tanks, it contains spill containment.
what do you think about maybe doing, you know, that the manufacturer thing? You know, as you said, it's a temporary thing, but then if this is temporary and then there's a sunset on it. And so that the permanent spill tank needs to be installed, approved and installed by a certain date, so that this doesn't happen.
Right, doesn't drag on forever.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's reasonable.
But so they're not permitted today, they don't have spill
Yeah.
containment today, you put a liner that's gonna unfold upon, it unfolds?
They have to roll the tanks on top of it, so it's underneath the tank itself.
How many gallons does that hold?
The liner,
Yeah.
I do not know. I know that it extends a foot from either side of the tank and extends up a foot.
But it's an 18,000 gallon tank.
Right, and so it would be it's like it's spill containment until basically a truck could get back there to start pumping, or it's not gonna hold 18,000 gallons.
Is there an alarm system on the tank?
The tanks, due to the fact that they're supposed to be mobile, do not have an alarm system. There is a tape measure that's actively sitting on top of them where it looks like they're measuring them, and there isn't evidence of it's spilling over, but I think that some type of alarm structure would be a reasonable thing for us to, like, even though it's a mobile tank, that doesn't mean that it can't have some type of mobile alarm structure that's there,
Yeah.
or you know, be plugged in while it's not on the road for an alarm structure, and so that's the type of advice, spill containment, should we have alarms on it, what type of inspections do we think that these tanks need, and who's doing those inspections and how often? Are things that I think to consider.
If you were to have an alarm system, at what capacity, would it be 3/5 or?
I would have to, I'm not too sure. Right now, the blue tank is within probably 4 inches of the top,
Which is really
which
out there.
is tall.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was out on site, I mean, it could be less now, but it was, like I said, there's no evidence that it has overtopped, but it was very close to the top. The gray tank was only about maybe 2/3 full.
I was also thinking of an alarm system that would detect a leak through the valve.
You could do that. I mean, the biggest danger of the valve failing, I believe, is probably like just somebody operating it. Like if it's, those valves are fairly robust, and I think like if in freezing temperature, someone goes to spin that thing with a lot of force, that's when it's gonna break.
Okay.
But it could certainly crack. Due to ice that's around the valve
That's
itself.
generally where I'm coming.
Yeah,
Does the state or DEP offer any guidance on transfer stations and spill containment and?
they don't. So septic haulage and septic transfer stations has fallen to the local municipalities to deal with. And when I talked to Claire Golden, her advice was to work with the person. If we're issuing a permit, then we need to make sure that the site is in compliance.
I think this might be a question for Ron. Well, if the main concern is the failure of the valve, I'm wondering if there could be like a shut-off valve before that valve, that in an emergency might shut it down.
That idea, exactly.
That's a good
Yeah, I
consideration.
don't think that's a problem.
So that if if that valve would be open, and then maybe test it, or for compliance to make sure that it works, the interior one. The first one. That's how plumbing works in a house. That.
Makes sense.
And then as far as spill containment, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that we need it on impervious surfaces. And I heard Dominique talk about third-party review of a spill containment that comes in. I mean, do you think it's reasonable that whatever spill containment is submitted, it like has an engineer stamp on it? Or can that be something that's drawn up just by a local contractor?
I think it's your comfort level.
It depends on the contractor too, probably.
Yeah.
So I have a question. Is
Yes.
concrete impervious?
Yes.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be, I'm just speaking up to the box here, having like if you know how a shower pan works, where it tapers down.
Mhm.
So if you just have a concrete slab in the center, there's a sump that pumps back into the tank.
You could do that.
That's,
Yeah, but you still need to have some type of berm structure around
Well, you
it,
can still have it around it, but
and then
at least you funnel it
Right.
down
There was
and you
some-
pump it back into the tank if it's leaking.
the only exception would be that you have to deal with rainwater.
Yeah, it's true.
But I've most spill containments to deal with rainwater funnel either to a corner or to a center location to deal with it. Like, so even these temporary deployed structures, they have to be pumped regularly after rainstorms. So that you're getting that rainwater out of there. But I think, yeah, having it, that's a great idea to have
Or
it
even
pumped
having
right back to
something
the
like-
tank.
Something over it, like a steel structure that's just a roof, keep as much water out
Yeah,
for the rain,
oh, you mean
like covering them,
covering like
like a carport.
covering the berm structure?
Depends.
Like, you make the walls that are a foot, taper it down, have a sump, and then you're not gonna get much rainwater that way.
Like a regular transfer station. Sounding pretty.
But again, they're still
Yeah, I
mobile
was gonna
though.
say that's the
Right.
issue.
They can still,
And so
they can
that-
still be moved.
The issue with any type of berm structure is that one side of this is gonna have to be able to be removed or ramped. So it's either ramped down to that height or it's some type of, you know, like would be an extreme example, but an example of what our wastewater treatment plant is they have watertight gates that come up, right, to keep the flood waters out. And like, so if we build a permanent structure around these tanks, then they're permanent. They're no longer mobile and therefore they would be out of Title V compliance.
Good point.
So one idea is, you know, we can ramp it down in whatever way that it gets ramped down, so that ramp. A truck can pull a trailer in and out of it, and that meets up to the same elevation as the surrounding berms. Or, I mean, yeah,
I think we can let somebody tell
we
us.
can let somebody tell us that
professional
too.
thinks, And if you're comfortable with it,
So-
move ahead. If not, we can review it as a
You
board.
don't want bath fitters to,
We don't wanna tell them
right,
exactly.
to do it.
Also, who's the operator on this one?
Is Wind River.
Wind River, you know, I think also having guidance from this board on when Wind River, can they operate this right now? Does it need to be emptied? And should they not be operating until it goes before all the board, although we have a pretty much of a quorum here if you all decide you wanted to just make a call. Because they're not permitted right now. They're in non-compliance right now. They cannot produce any logs that say they're monitoring this, the grease things almost filled to the top, so. Sort of an imminent threat. And I don't know how long this will take to get a design plan in place, appropriately. If that's where you decide to support this, and I'm not sure if you have to go for conservation commission because you're right there and you're gonna be putting a solid structure.
I'm not sure you need to either run that by, Chuck to see, and that may be,
Abutting the wetlands almost.
right, that maybe it's small because it's already in a degraded area. And you're just, putting, that up the permanent structure, so it may not be a
We
non-issue.
did talk to Chuck and he's never been involved in this before,
I'm sure.
yeah, but I think that if you were putting a structure there, he would get involved. So I think we have-
You have to run it by him anyway, yeah. I'm wondering, how long it would take for him to get that temporary, spill containment?
I mean, I think we'd have, or go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I'd have to defer to Wind River on, I don't know how long it takes to get these tanks emptied, moved, the site area prepped. And the product in,
Right.
so those would be things that we'd have to try to figure out, and maybe until we figured out that temporary. Fix. I mean, I don't, yeah,
And if they've already started a logbook, to make sure that they're compliant with the logbook,
They,
I mean, could this be done temporarily?
Ron, I haven't been back to check, but Ron did say that Rob had a logbook, right? Has Rob been doing his logbook?
Yes, I talked to him when we talked the other day, and he's got the logbooks, he's doing that now. And, as far as, we put the application, I mean, I'm not sure of the date, but whenever it's renewed, we usually put it in a month before, so this has been going on a while.
Yeah.
And like you said, in 22, we thought we had done everything everybody wanted us to do. And the knock on wood, we haven't had any problems in
Yeah.
50 years, so.
I mean, but in 2022, you got an enforcement letter that said you need to put a
I'm sorry,
logbook and you
I
need to
guess
have.
it's bad.
Oh, but that letter in 2022 said you need to have a impervious surface protecting this area. And also that you need to keep a logbook, both of which were not done.
Right.
That's the
And they,
reality.
if you need something that's further back, they can do it by their records.
No, I'm not asking that you would go back at this point and try and create a log. I'm
Yeah.
just pointing out that the operator has not been compliant for many years on this.
I'm wondering if there should be like a yearly inspection by the health department.
I think that it's also, and we can address this at another meeting, this is a $25 permit. And so. I mean, the yearly inspection would happen when the permit was pulled. So,
Which is what
So it
generated
is a yearly-
which
this.
was what generated this. So,
I'm wondering, while he's not in compliance, if he could run with drastically less capacity in the tanks. On a subsistence level, really a fraction of what's in the tanks until he's in compliance, but that the service, as far as the service is concerned, is still offered, but he would have to keep the tanks much less capacity until he's in full compliance.
Maybe Rob could submit the logs to Cody to make sure things are.
But it's in terms of, I'm in this corner of concern about people choosing other ways of emptying.
Yeah.
If they don't have access to
Well,
this
we have a
tank.
wastewater treatment center where people are routinely dumping their.
It's off hours and middle of the night kind of stuff.
Right, and anecdotally, we've heard of this happen.
Yes,
It's
It's
an
a single operator
Right.
out of
Exactly.
many.
exactly. So that we don't lose that protection. But for the some mishap, we're talking a tiny fraction of what there is now. I don't know whether it's economically feasible to run your operation that way or not, but that's.
Can take very long.
If there was a problem, they have enough trucks on site that they, if there was a problem, they could empty that tank with the trucks that are parked.
Okay. So. I think 10% capacity.
yeah, I think that the primary purpose of these tanks is. For emergency response and for freezing temperatures. And stuff freezing inside the tanks and. The blue tank that's holding grease is, its primary response is in a lot of ways just financial. And so, because it is just waiting for enough grease in order to run it to the grease plant, opposed to, and I don't know a lot about. The trucks, how often they have to collect grease. But so, yeah, maybe we have the gray tank running at a limited capacity and the grease tank can be pumped. Or both tanks can be run at a limited capacity until in
As
compliance.
a grease tank, I don't think is much of a public health threat as the gray water,
Yeah.
tank. And anecdotally, when you look at function checks, there are some septic haulers who will mix in some grease in with tight tank things and run that through the wastewater treatment plant and runs into problems with the oil grease separators, and historically that's been a problem.
Yes.
I'm not saying the grease tank should be put into our wastewater treatment center. But it sounds like the grease tank
That's
should
where
be
they-
empty because it's full to capacity right now.
Right, they shouldn't be emptied yet.
Yeah.
But that is something of a statement that we've improved our ability to capture grease in restaurants and whatnot through the fats, oils and grease group. So that there necessarily would be more grease, because it used to go just straight into the drain
And into the harbor.
and into the harbor. Yeah. So that, a full tank is a sign of progress.
Okay,
So perhaps we allow the continuance of the operation at, I don't know, 50% capacity with logs submitted to the health department. With a deadline, maybe a deadline for the temporary measures to be installed. And then a longer deadline for permanent spill containment to be installed. And of course, with the other suggestion you had about the second valve. I think that makes sense. That makes sense?
Yeah,
so continuance at 50% capacity.
Ron, does that sound reasonable or?
I didn't hear it all.
oh. So,
Motorcycles start as crushes.
Yeah, exactly.
No one wants us to wear that hair protection.
Are we talking about issuing a temporary
So-
permit?
well, we're talking about not doing what basically would be a stop work order, correct? Like right now, because they don't have a permit and they're out of compliance.
Mhm.
So yeah, I guess we're talking about doing a temporary permit until they're in compliance. No,
50% is a lot.
I think 50% is a lot.
I don't know, I
I'd
don't
say
know,
10%.
but is 10% even usable? I don't know.
That's still 9,000 gallons at 50%. That's a lot.
I think any spill is. You know, I don't know, I guess, yeah,
The argument was for emergency use.
Yeah.
So you don't need to accumulate
9,000 gallons.
that much sewage in an emergency situation.
I'd say half that.
I think they're one of the few companies that handle the grease now, and they have their own treatment plant for handling. As far as, except for the inside grease, which they also do, companies pick up, but as far as septic tank restaurants and stuff that have grease traps on a septic system, I think they're one of the few people that are doing it correctly right now.
Yeah,
So originally this was brought as a consultant, but we do have a quorum of the board and basically I brought this before the technical, or you guys for technical feedback. Because the only thing I would want to add is, do we want to make,
Can I interject something?
Yeah.
Can we vote on something where we haven't notified the abutters?
It's not a very, I mean, it's a permitting request, that's the,
But it's to allow it to operate out of compliance.
I don't know the answer to that question.
I think it's just discussion, I don't think we need to
yeah,
vote,
so we won't have to vote.
right?
So, but we will have to vote next week.
No,
Or-
Yeah,
I'm wondering if you are going to give them a temporary permit, should it be 30 days or 90 days or 60 days or
Agreed.
what? I think that should be figured out, that there be a sunset, on
Mhm.
the permit and stuff.
I think the rationale is that Wind River has to propose and Ronnie, to spec out what they think is reasonable and how long it would take them to do it. And then talk to Chuck about the process of what they need to go before the Conservation Commission
Mm.
to put an impervious area down. And then that will dictate
Right,
the length of time.
two sunsets, right, yeah,
for temporary and then permanent,
right.
Yeah.
So, were you gonna say something? So Ron, the Board of Health hearing is in 2 weeks. And I think if you can. Before that meeting, work on coming up with the type of time frame it's gonna take you to either get into temporary compliance with those temporary berms. And, work on what you think of feasible, or what spill containment you're proposing, maybe talk to. Yeah, a local engineer, I'm sure you know a lot of them, about spill containment for that structure, and bring something like that to the Board of Health hearing, so that we have some timeframes of. That we could potentially set for a temporary permit, sorry, and then, issuing your permit. Once the structure's in place would you be able to pull that together in 2 weeks?
And I think when you hire somebody to look at the spill containment area, I think it's also good that there be details on the valves and details on the alarm system as well.
Can we have the tanks emptied within 2 weeks?
So that will be a variance then, because you are now making it a permanent structure.
Right.
Right,
Against Title V.
Wait, why are we making it?
the alarms,
Well,
The alarms, I don't think, as long as it's not hardwired in,
They're wireless.
Right.
and they could do a
Just plug
wireless
in, right,
alarm.
Right, yeah.
I guess I would have to have some type of backup power for the alarm itself.
Right.
But can we have the tanks empty
Like now,
2 weeks, within 2 weeks?
I don't know, Ron, can they be emptied?
You said that you want them, you don't want them to use them, or?
That's not what I'm at, it just, both of them seem to be very, very full, and wouldn't it be
No,
better
no,
idea to have them
they're
empty?
emptied on at least a weekly basis or sometimes more.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But the grease, not the grease tank though, right?
No.
Yeah. Well, it's just without a permit and with no containment.
Yeah,
We have a chance to have them empty.
right, get them emptied. I'm running at a lower capacity.
And that would also give an opportunity to inspect the tanks fully with them.
I think
if
when
they have
the
to be
tanks,
moved.
when the
And-
tanks are moved is the time
That's what-
that you can inspect the bottom.
That would be a marine
Good idea.
engineer who would inspect those tanks.
So when I talked with the designer for about inspection criteria. He said, you know, there is when they're jacked up and on the trucks, you can crawl underneath it and there's a tool to measure wall thickness.
Yeah.
That someone could have, he said typically for these tanks, because they are very robust and over-engineered. That usually a visual inspection of like welds and cracks and seams works just fine, I don't know. Wind River rents or leases these tanks, so maybe. The tank company can can come out for that inspection purposes.
But the liability on the tank is not for the person who's operating.
The liability on the, yeah, they lease the tanks from,
They then point a finger.
is that how it works? Or,
Wow.
And also, he's the operator, but you're the owner of the property. So, you know, the other question to this board is who's permitted, and I believe it to be the operator, not the owner. So Ronnie, you're here, but you're, you know, the business owner is not you here, right? The person who's owning these tanks and running this business is not you. So the person who's gonna be permitted is the person who's operating the business on your property. Right? So that's the other thing, is we've been incorrectly permitting. We've been permitting the landowner rather than the operator.
Well, I think,
The permit has always been issued under my name
Yes,
and
that's incorrect.
Wind Rivers. And we
And
share
Wind
the,
Rivers.
yeah, and share the responsibility. Wind River registered their trucks with the Board of Health. Well, I don't know if they still call it a night soil license. The trucks are separate from this situation.
Yeah, except the
The trucks are registered with you is for transporting
Mhm.
and
Well,
the
not these.
and the transfer station is separate from this.
RB Strong, utilized that first and then he slowly sold part of the property. And it's part of the business over to Wind River, so it's not like they've been separate entities.
Oh, we were told that Ronnie owns the land.
Well,
and Wind River
that's
runs the
now, but I'm
business.
talking about historically what happened.
I see.
Okay, you know, I'm trying to.
so moving, yeah, but moving forward, should the permit be? Pulled under Wind River?
I don't know, I think that's a legal question.
He's the operator.
Yeah.
I don't have a full memory of it, but basically I was the landowner, so I end up being the one that's responsible for whatever happens. And Wind River was added to it because they're the, like you say, they're the one that's putting it back, but as when it was first done, I forget, we sold out to them, I don't even know how many years ago now. This is how it was set up when we were doing all the rigmarole, selling out and everything.
Mhm.
And that's why the permit stayed with my name
Yeah.
and their name.
Is
on
that
it as
something
well.
you want? I mean, I can imagine Wind River wanting that.
Yeah,
because
Wind River
that-
wants it, yeah.
Yeah, it was,
Your part
they
responsible.
have enough lawyers to cover this desk.
Well, and I'm thinking the same thing. You want to see the lease on that tank.
No, I just want,
Who's responsible for the maintenance
is
and safety
responsible?
of that tank?
Who owns the tank?
The lease company, right?
Yeah, it's a veteran organization.
Okay,
I'm not sure of the
so
name.
is
on
this a
it.
question for Suzanne again?
I can ask Rob, I'm sure. he
no,
does
we're
it, but-
quite clear on the permitting answer. It's the question of, if we have now a tank issue, like if. Is the business accountable for the viability of that device or not?
Exactly.
You know, that could be a Suzanne question, but we're quite clear that I'm sorry, Cody, if you were not clear,
No.
we're quite clear that the operator has to be the permittee.
Yes.
That's absolutely the case.
Agreed. Just liability has just suddenly been.
So Wind River should be on the permit, is what.
Yes.
Yeah, there's been both names on the permit since
Yeah.
we sold out to
I
them.
don't think it's on there.
I have to look. Okay.
And you need clarification
Yeah.
as to who is responsible for the operation of those tanks.
Yeah,
terms of the
the person
functionality
running
of
the
it.
business.
Yeah.
I can get that from Rob.
Right,
Yeah,
because that shouldn't go, you shouldn't have to suffer that.
I wouldn't want my
And
name on
Cody,
that
you're gonna check,
permit.
see if the logbooks are current.
Yeah, so I'll check to make sure logbooks are current before the next Board of Health meeting, so I think, yeah, action items kind of moving forward. Is Ron, if you can come up with a time frame to get those tanks into compliance. How long it's gonna take to get a temporary structure around them, or how long it's gonna take to get a permanent structure around them. I don't,
Are we talking about, you and I talked about that day with the. Or,
I mean, what we talked about that day was some type of paved structure with a berm around it. I think that. You should have an engineer kind of look at it and come up with whether or not they think that that's adequate. Cause I don't know a lot about spill containment, I know a lot about a general
Yeah.
building construction, I understand, and that's kind of what we were talking about. You know, I can say the manufacturer has a 1 foot height requirement on their stuff, but I think you should talk to. An engineer, at least it sounds like Rob knows a lot from putting in the spill structure over at Roses Marine for their fuel system. Rob is the operator at Wind River. And so he might have a good idea, and so I talked to him or an engineer about what they think the structure should look like. But I think it should be impervious and have a berm around it, but also. Either be ramped on one side, or the berm has to be able to be removable on one side for the. Tanks to be able to move in and out.
You know, we could pay that and ramp it, like you're saying, ramp up rather than down. And
Right, well, as long as they can hook up to those trailers and move them. And so. Yeah, so if you can come up with, you know, it's like, we only have 2 weeks, but if you've got it kickstarted, at least, so at the Board of Health meeting, we can talk about it. And then I'll stop out, and I'll reach out to Rob and see when he's around and stop out and take a look at those logbooks.
You can also have him submit to you the logbooks on a weekly basis.
Yeah,
Just
Yep.
submit to.
that's a good idea. And then I think getting like at least for right now, before that Board of Health hearing, making sure that those tanks are getting pumped down pretty regularly.
Yep.
Like
which they are now.
You know, and the logbooks will indicate that too, but yeah, I know the grease tank was quite full when I was out there. And so let's get them down to a lower capacity until the Board of Health can make a ruling in 2 weeks. On how to move forward.
Dan, can I ask you a question without putting you on the spot? No, okay.
No, go ahead, but.
Do you think one of the 40 mil barriers like you do on a septic system with an earthen back would be a good?
Oh, sorry, I don't know.
I mean, that holds back a septic system. So the leaching field when you have put those 40 mil barriers around it.
Right. The only difference is if that's a small amount of water dribbling potentially against it. If one of these tanks were to let go, which like you said, it hasn't in 50 years, but it would be likely a large surge. So I don't know if that type of 40 mil barrier would work or not. I don't know.
I think your idea of recirculating is very attractive. Makes good sense.
A lot of work, but
Well, it doesn't sound.
Go ahead.
What we're saying.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just, Ron, it doesn't sound like they're looking for you to solve the problem today. They want you to come back to the Board of
Yeah.
Health meeting with a time frame.
Yeah.
So that's what they're asking for today.
Yeah.
And in order to stay within compliance of Title V, it has to be arguably movable.
Yeah.
It's not.
I mean, I do think that there's if these were just. Like regular tankers that were there and there was no transfer back to another truck. It would alleviate a lot of risk. There is just more risk because you have to
Well,
pump.
this, everything that I'm hearing and over the
Yeah.
thing, we had 3 of those. And then they really didn't like that, so we put the 10,000 gallon permanent one. And then the permanent one was wrong, so then we put these, so it's been like we've tried to do what
Well,
everybody wants.
we've got a file now, so we're keeping track of everything.
Yeah. I mean,
Instead of just here,
we've,
you know,
we've kind of been to what everybody wants at the time.
Yes.
If you wanna go back to the trailers, then we can go back to the trailers.
I mean, the trailers would still have to have spill containment around them. So
Right.
I think the important thing here is that we have adequate spill containment around whatever. Whatever tank, like mobile tank is there, even though this is kind of a.
I understand the concern with the frac tanks, but I mean, if you had just regular tankers, you could. If that's what you want, we can do that and remove the frac tanks, you know?
That's more in keeping with the regulation.
That would be more in keeping with the regulation, but you'd still have to have some type of spill containment for those tanks that are there.
Stationary.
As they have at Rose's,
What's that?
as they have at Rose's.
Right, so, but yeah, I mean, a regular tanker truck that the truck backs up to and drives away, that's more in keeping with the law.
Okay.
And-
So if we eliminated the frac tanks and then got 2 or 3 of those mobile tanks, that would eliminate all this?
You'd still have to have spill containment, you still have to have water tanks. So it would, I think it might be easier to design spill containment around a trailer that's leaving once a week than one that's there permanently.
You bet.
But you'd still have to provide spill containment for that tank when it was on site. But that's definitely an option, I mean, it's more in keeping with the way the law is written. I think that the frac tanks. They're mobile, but they're permanent at the same time, so
They can't go over the road.
they can't go over the road with liquid in them, they can go over the road without liquid, yes.
But with liquid, if there's a problem,
Yeah, well,
what what he's recommending is that you can just bring a truck up and pull the tankers away.
Can't, no.
Well, what he was saying with the tanker trucks,
Truck,
yes,
yeah.
the tanker truck, you can just pull it.
We had done that for years. and
Yeah.
There was, I don't remember the exact, it's been a long time. We put the 10,000 gallon, we eliminated them, put the 10,000 gallon tank in there. But then the 10,000 gallon tank became a questionable thing, so.
Because it's a permanent structure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, 10,000 gallon is definitely. Not in keeping with Title V. Title V specifically says that you can't.
So we eliminated
So
that,
15,000.
and then everybody was in agreement that the frac tanks were a solution, so that's why we got the frac tanks.
Yeah,
I remember back when they did it, the 3 larger tank,
yeah, one of them's still there,
right?
in the
Yeah, one
back.
of them's, that's wait for them to go and cut that out.
I'm wondering if the whole yard should have almost like, how there's a swap or stormwater, managed for, a property. There should be some kind of a management plan for the property, because things could spill in numerous places for the property. If there should be some kind of a management plan in case there is a spill of any kind.
I mean, it wouldn't be for, wouldn't be for this board to decide, but yeah, I mean, because we're just dealing with wastewater, but I think that's common probably where.
And I'm wondering if the wastewater treatment plant had one, because they really should have one, so.
They
Spill
probably
containment?
do.
Well,
Or no, like a
again,
spill
well,
procedure is, I think.
Well,
They must have
But yeah.
something.
I missed something.
Oh, that's famous last words.
They'll take care of it.
So, I mean, Ronnie, that is another option, if you wanna propose getting rid of these tanks
Yeah.
in spill containment for. Just the trailers, that is an option, I mean, I think that potentially could be simpler, if you had like these poly barriers that you could just back something on and then they're. Soft sides, you can fold them up, and then when there's rainwater, you just pump them out.
And also check to see what the wastewater treatment plant has. They must have.
For what,
There were a lot of trucks that pull up there and there could be spills, I know there's been.
yeah,
They must have some procedure that's been codified,
well, the benefit, or not the benefit, but they're on asphalt over at the spill containment, like there's no. If something spills out of one of the trucks here, it just goes into the ground or
Right.
off the side,
We can ask them about it, so.
so.
I mean, there's 2 solutions.
So sounds like we'll look for Ron for you guys to maybe come with which option you want to go with in a couple weeks.
What was that?
Door number one, door number two.
No, as far as the frac tanks versus
Yeah,
the mobile tanks.
yeah.
Yeah, and just what spill containment you wanna contain for
Particularly
each.
because they don't own the
So-
frac tank.
But again, that's Wind River who's making that decision, correct? That's not you.
Excuse me?
You would not be making that decision. Wind River would be making that decision,
That's
correct?
correct.
Yeah. So we're speaking to the landowner,
Yeah.
not the operator.
And to be fair, I didn't issue all the layer, so.
I have control of the property.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, of
And,
course.
and whatever pleases you and whatever we need to do, we're gonna do, and they can't argue with me.
Yeah, I understand that. So my point is that if, to make the decision to use
So
trucks
moved.
versus
The
tankers
truck-
versus
yeah,
fracs, that would be him.
Yeah, I'm not a dictator, I wanna talk to them which way they wanna.
I know, but is that like, am I right to say that that's his business decision? You don't have part of, and you don't have an interest in that business?
No,
Is that correct?
I have an interest in staying there.
Because he pays you rent?
Excuse me?
Because he pays you rent?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I'm just trying to get to who's the operator. So if all your financial benefit is that you're getting rent paid for the use of your property, you're the landowner. And all of the decisions that we're talking about right now have to come from him, the business operator. Right, so you're speaking on behalf of somebody who's not in the room, just to be clear. And he'll be the one renting the trucks, he'll be the one changing the fracking, he'll be the one pumping these tanks, right? Not you or any of your employees, right? So that's what's really important for us all to understand, that the Wind River is the person that has to petition the board.
So maybe we should make sure Wind River is here at the Board of Health. meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, they have to be, right? Because they're the operator, they're the one going for the
Like-
permit.
Right, but the letter I sent out at least didn't, it included,
Right.
yeah.
If they
Just
leave, then I
rough.
have to go back into the pumping business, so.
I beg your pardon?
So I do have an interest in keeping
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
If they leave you what? I'm sorry.
He goes back into the pumping business.
Oh, I'm sure, well, we have a pumping station right around the corner. I'm sure people can figure something out. Most of the other operators have. Right?
Cool.
Okay.
So I would encourage you in 2 weeks, when you appear before the board, to have as complete a plan as possible, rather than don't give us options. Propose something.
And anybody's welcome announced or unannounced anytime they wanna come over.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks, Ronnie.
Thank you, Ron.
See you later.
Do you think it was pretty good housekeeping when you came?
You mean around the tanks?
Yeah, and everything.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there was only that little bit of spillage on that one, so. Yeah, it took the good housekeeping, like I said, in my report, it didn't appear that they had overflowed. So.
Thank you for everybody's time.
Bye, Ron.
See you
Nice to
later.
see you. Bye-bye.
Send money home.
Right at the get. I can say from my experience on the board that Ronnie said he was going to do something, he did it.
I know, but it's not Ronnie Strong who has to do
I got
this.
that, but just,
Follow through with this.
They'll make sure they do it.
a lot of people didn't have that reputation, but he did.
I know. Yeah, I could tell that there's some great,
With flowing beard and motorcycle running in the background and all that, you told the truth and did what he says he's gonna do.
awesome.
He's a wonderful character. Very nice man.
So are
Got
you.
that sense.
So we're jumping into item number 6, discussion of changes to the City of Gloucester Board of Health on-site wastewater regulations. Who's going?
Well, it's a continuing saga. So we last ended up with and stopped working on it. Looking at nitrogen, and that we think for tonight is too big of a topic to tackle. Primarily because there needs to be more discussion, but we can continue, we can start after that and go as far as we can, if that's all right with you all. Would really like to get these before the board and, finish them up, because there's several things that we're trying to tackle, that are continuing to come before us as variances, and if we don't believe in them, they shouldn't be variances, right?
I think he.
Right.
Go through one whole page left.
Do you wanna pull it up and share on yours?
Sure.
Oh, you mean last week?
Yeah.
Last week.
Didn't get there.
So we're putting section 7 on ice,
Yes,
okay,
because Tony's adding to section 7. He's putting the old regs back into section 7,
good.
and then we need to identify which areas we're actually going
Okay, fine.
to. Identify as nitrogen sensitive and not nitrogen sensitive, and that's gonna take. That's gonna take a little bit of time, and me sitting down with Dave or Tony sitting down with Dave and identifying those tributaries instead of, we proposed just doing the 400-foot setback.
Yeah.
So. We're putting it on ice until we get the old regulations back in, and then, yeah, instead of blanketing. The beaches, we kind of look at the drainage areas and look at what areas are not getting properly flushed.
Okay.
Can you all see that? Can you guys see it? I'm taking that as a yes. So what we're not doing is this part, and so we would start with pretreatment or innovative alternative systems, okay? It was page 14, I'll tell you. Because we've edited these so that they're bouncing around from the original copies that you had. I do want to call out one thing that perhaps we can go back and revisit it if we have time, which is being sure we've taken a close look at the setbacks and that we believe in those setbacks. So it was table 1 in our old regulations. It's now included in our, and we don't have to do this right now, but I just wanted. Offer variances against these setbacks repeatedly, like almost in some cases all the time. And so if that's the case, why do we have that regulation? Why are we making the designer go to all the trouble to ask for variance if we're automatically gonna do it? So, you know, what is the reason that we have that setback? Do we believe in that setback? I'll give you an example, Dave. You brought up, grade versus
Right.
distance as an
Right,
example.
yeah.
Right, so if you guys are always gonna be like, oh, it's this grade, so who cares about the distance, then let's change our regulation to be reflective of the whole purpose is our local environment.
Right,
And I'm not suggesting that you can do away with them, but I just wanna be sure we believe in what we write on this paper.
right.
Because it's a lot of work for the designers, it's a lot of work for us, a lot of work for you to have to hear everyone individually. And we know that other towns have taken different tacks, right? So I'm not proposing that we do away with them at all. I just want to be clear on that. I just want to be sure that whatever we put on there, we believe in it. And so when somebody has to ask for an exception, it's a big deal. Because we already believe that that's the number.
Right, well, the end subject goes to storm flow, which I'm totally with you because it doesn't make sense at all of the horizontal, separation. And what Tony.
We did actually change that one
Yeah,
in the
we did, yeah.
regs, so that one might not be the best.
Yeah, sorry.
Unfortunately, I would say an example would be like all of Wingersheek Beach, right, is in a coastal dune. And so for all local upgrades, as long as the designer submits a alternative design system, then we waive that variance. So instead of having that as a variance, why don't we just have it written in our local regs.
Or
That if you're
upgrades
in a coastal dune for local upgrades,
only.
you need to provide this, and then we don't have to hear it as a variance anymore.
I
Secondary
agree.
treatment.
Right, secondary treatment.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
defined by, you know,
But-
deed.
So that would be an example of it, and I think,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
of kind of like what we're gearing towards, or like. You know, our setbacks, certain setbacks for soil absorption system from buildings, or, I mean, that would be a less one, but.
It's still
like,
one, it's an example
Right,
of one
it's an example of
that we
one,
continuously waive.
that we waive.
But there's also the distinction, usually what we're waiving are improvements to
That's
failed
correct.
systems.
Yep.
And there, that's a different metric in that we want to make the system better, and usually that accomplishes.
Yeah.
New construction is a different issue.
Right, and I think that those things
I
would
agree.
be called out differently, I guess. It's just, we have a lot of just local upgrades, the majority of what we have in Gloucester is local upgrades, and for things where we constantly waive it.
We
You
should
know, I
just put
think it would
language in
be,
there for-
so there was a designer that doesn't work in our area that just submitted an application and they're not. So they don't necessarily know our variances, and so they proposed a conventional system. In the coastal dune. And I had to send it back to them and say,
Not happening.
you're in the coastal dune, I know this is our setback, but like you have to design. You know, an advanced treatment system. I didn't say that, but I said, here's our variances, you have to make sure you. You know, fit this criteria because you're in it.
Right.
And I didn't propose like them putting in advanced treatment, they can figure that out for themselves, but.
Probably should.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, when, my recollection is when we wrote these regulations, it was done as much for expedience. In order to be able to move forward,
Right.
to comply with the feds, and the story I heard, I was so green, I had no hand in it, but that basically all the numbers were doubled from what Title V was calling for. And they sent it into Boston to see what would happen, and the answer was fine.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a reason for regulation, right? Yeah.
But for expedience sake, so that they could move forward and do the inspections and have some teeth in it, that's what's the genesis behind it. Am I overstating that?
I think you were a little bit, I know that Dave Ferris was a frequent visitor to the health department, you know, ahead of time, and so. There was discussions behind the scenes as to what the state would accept and what they wouldn't.
Yeah, I wasn't.
Does that jive with your memory as well?
In terms of the wastewater management plan, yes. In
Right.
terms of the setbacks, those predate even my time. The board adopted the enhanced setbacks when Mary Miles Morser and
Really?
Rini Gross-Nutbrown were the board, and Steve Nakashima and Bob Enos were the head health directors. So those enhanced setbacks have been on the books before there was ever the concept of secondary treatment units or anything like that.
Okay.
So I do think it's prudent to revisit them in terms of today's knowledge base. Both good and bad, right? The bad things, sea level rise and things like that. The good that we now have secondary treatment units and other options available to us. And also, I think what you're leaning towards is separating out new construction from upgrades, you know, so that would be a smart way to look at it.
Mhm.
And I'm definitely on the same page as you, like, if we have a repair, like, we're gonna approve it, it's just. You know, do we wanna see it? But at the staff level, it's gonna be a secondary treatment unit if it's on Wiggersheek Beach in a coastal resource area. If it's within 100 feet of a wetlands, I think, is that kind of what you're getting at, like, do they need to apply for a variance still?
Or no, it's just like, should we write it in instead of having like. That the setback exists for coastal dune, we're saying like, if you're in the coastal dune. You need to have
Right,
And you-
advanced treatment,
And you already have an existing system,
Right.
right? You-
Right.
yeah,
an
this is
upgrade.
not
Repair
for
or-
new.
repair
So
or-
instead of applying for a variance, you just do. We have it written into law that like, for a local upgrade, you need to make sure you're doing this.
yeah, I think.
And
that's
then
a
it's
good idea.
not a variance,
Right,
and so it doesn't have to come before the board.
right.
Um,
But if there were some local upgrade approvals attached to that, it would still come before the.
But yeah, potentially, depending on what the local upgrade approvals are, but I mean, it seems like there's always.
One of my pet peeves
Mhm.
is that people use local upgrade approvals when variances, might make things more of a maximum feasible compliance rather than.
Gotcha.
Well, can you give me an example of that? Because a local upgrade has to be no change in design flow, right? That you are improving your system at like or better. So what?
So under a local upgrade approval, you can reduce the setback to groundwater. And that wouldn't have, that doesn't require a variance. In those instances, it would be nice to have that come before the board. We could say, hey, the example is the one that you were just dealing with out on Hesperus and Fuller. Where they have a reduction to, groundwater, and that's a bad one. And, it was nasty, what's coming out of those pipes at the bottom of Hesperus. If that was approved under a local upgrade approval rather than advanced treatment.
Just like the failing system.
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry.
That wouldn't have been good if it didn't come before the board.
Right.
And it's good it came before the board because then we made some adjustments as to where seasonally high groundwater was. So it's very important that that come before us rather than be approved, just as a local upgrade approval.
Exactly.
Do we need to better define what a local upgrade is?
Well, my point is people automatically go to local upgrade approvals. And that doesn't necessarily achieve maximum feasible compliance. And that's the heading for local upgrade approvals, is that you're supposed to try to do that if, and maximum feasible compliance isn't automatically go to local upgrade approvals. Maximum feasible compliance might be putting an advanced treatment system or getting a variance, or something else go before the board. That shouldn't be automatic, that's done by the designer in the sanitarian.
No, but if we were
Well,
to,
I'm just saying though, if it's written into law, that like they'd have to put in those advanced treatment systems.
Well, on Winkishi Beach, I'm totally with you with coastal dune. That totally makes sense. But then if there's 2 or 3 other local upgrade approvals that are part of that.
Yeah,
I
well,
think
then
we
those
should
might
know
have
about
to
it.
come before it anyways.
I'm confused, but
I think we're talking about 2 like different setbacks, you're saying.
Right,
Right. And so the coastal dune was just one that. I mean, and bear with me, because like, I've only been here 5 weeks. And almost every project I've looked at is out on Winkishi Beach. And so like, I'm able to like, look like, oh, there comes the same variances again, like, oh, same variances again.
Yes,
I see the same variances come up there.
they're easy to see.
The coastal dune being one and land subject to coastal flow, which makes. So like, in those instances. Of like, instead of calling it out as a variance, I guess. I mean, land subject to coastal flowage is a little different than coastal dune, because coastal dune is kind of straightforward, right? If you're in the coastal dune, you put in advanced treatment.
that makes sense.
Land subject to coastal flowage, you could be either in that buffer zone or in. The actual flood zone, in which case we look at,
But I
but
thought,
that would be one that you wouldn't necessarily waive.
I think to Dave's point, he's worried about people coming into local upgrade approvals that don't come to us
Yeah.
that will significantly impact the design, like. Like the groundwater one's probably the biggest local upgrade approval that you could apply for that could have the most impact, right? Where you could say, well, give us a foot. We're not gonna do an advanced design, but we still wanna do that. And I think generally, it's become pretty general that most towns won't grant that without an alternative system, unless it's a small house, good soil, maybe you give them a foot to keep the plumbing the way it is, for example.
Gotcha.
But we can just keep it as.
so you want to be
Local-
sure
local
that
upgrade
the
approval.
risk is still, the risk of, bad decision is seen by you, not just by the health department, which is fine. But don't you think also that we could accomplish that by language in the regulations of, what has to be taken into account?
I think it's just difficult,
Okay,
just for a case by case.
I think it's a case by case, but
And I-
I'm on board with the
Yeah.
coastal dune, thing.
Okay.
And I think simplifying it the way you guys want to is good, and I think at some point, Cody can probably run with most of the local upgrade approvals, but I think we discussed it a few meetings ago, but for the
Right.
time being, it probably makes sense to just come to us.
Mhm.
Unless it's like, because Cody it can be approved at the staff level, it just depends how the department wants to handle them.
Mhm.
So maybe a point where, and there may be
Yeah,
silly,
it's-
silly
it's-
ones
it's
that Cody
different
can
to be Like in
handle.
a training moment versus
Yeah.
our regulations, and
Yeah,
I'm more looking at situations where we routinely, like, the designer knows, we know how it's gonna go, like, why is it even an upgrade? Why is it even a variance request? Right, if everybody is routinely saying like, oh, that's, that's just that, we don't care about it, then it shouldn't be in our regulations. Like, our regulations should be hardworking, that if, again, a variance is a big deal. Right, it shouldn't be a given that a variance is coming in with every single design.
And I think like if we just look at what's on there, like if we're looking at habitable and occupiable space, I've had multiple cases come up. Recently with that 20-foot setback, where I've talked to different board members and they have said that like, yeah, if that came in front of me, we'd totally pass it. But like, this is somebody who's putting a 3-season porch on their house or something minor. And so like, if we're just gonna waive like a 20-foot setback for a soil absorption system,
why do we have-
why do we have it? And why do we have a soil absorption system setback? I mean, we have it for, I would imagine serviceability and basement space, because basement space is gonna allow it. And so. Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at some of the ones that come across, or like, why do we have setbacks for the tanks that we always allow when Title V doesn't, when a tank poses very little risk?
Why don't, we could just go to Title V for
Yeah.
tanks and fields, I don't really see a harm in that, to be honest.
No, I don't, but there has to be, there has to be a setback between, the field and a habitable space.
Correct.
Right. No, and I think Title V does have a setback, we just have 20 feet, and I see us waiving it quite a bit in my short time.
Could we have it, it'll be waived if they put in a 40 mil HCV barrier?
Right, or we waive it because like the building doesn't actually is elevated, or
Right.
the building. I mean, Title V has it for a slab where it's, 10 feet. I'm just, yeah.
Or just do Title V.
Can I add a comment?
I'm just, in my experience, there was a property in Essex where, the people had a habitable, basement, and the kids all came down with Giardia, because things were seeping in, through the too close because of a septic system. And so that's always going in my mind.
Right.
I wanna make sure that doesn't happen.
So, I mean, I think that. Like for habitable or occupiable space, I think that like the definition maybe should. Like somehow include. That really we're trying to protect basement spaces. And we're trying to protect slab on grades. And so that we know, like, instead of somebody inferring like, oh yeah, this is the protection, because everyone can kind of. Rationally come to different conclusions on the same setback, right? And we can think about it in different ways why it's there. So yeah, so maybe our language instead of occupy, like. Habitable and occupiable space, below grade, almost.
Which is what Title V
Right.
is, 20 feet,
Right, what's that?
which is what Title V has,
They do,
20 feet too.
to a basement?
Yeah.
So we're doing
Oh.
it from any habitable space, and Title V already says it's to a basement?
I don't know the exact language, but
To a cellar wall, that's
cellar wall,
what Title V says.
so
So
it
is this
protects,
then a redundancy that's not relevant? Because we're doing for the whole.
I think so.
I mean, I'm only picking this one because it's on the screen and because I've had multiple and because I see it come up in my, like, sometimes like new eyes looking at the same stuff.
Right.
Can have an added benefit, because like I'm seeing like the same things coming up, but it's also can be naivety too. So I don't want to discount that.
That you need to have less work.
No, he definitely needs less work.
But like for a 3-season room on sonotubes, that could not encroach into our, but do we care about that?
No,
Not really.
right, yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, why don't we just do Title V, which already has a 20-foot setback to full foundations, which is really the only thing I think we need to care about.
Right.
And then that
Yeah.
way it can just be Title V.
Like I'm dealing with another case I've got, which I wanted to talk to the board about, but since we're on the topic, like a cantilevered second floor. So like the basement, the first floor meets the setback, but the second floor has foundation elements, not a cellar wall, that don't meet the setback. And it's elevated, and so it's habitable space within that zone, but it's not, for all intents and purposes, I think where the law was trying to go. Because an elevated. It still meets a 10-foot setback, right? It's not elevated over the platform, because the first floor makes the 20-foot setback. And so. It's just whether, yeah, so I think,
Is
in
we're
this case,
referencing
like, because
building-
everyone I've talked to or people I've talked to on the board have always said it's just basement space. Or it's slab on grade, chances where like you can get water and seepage infiltrating into a space, or you can get. Soil gases coming into a space. Which is a
So,
very real thing.
so in the interest of moving it along,
Yeah.
should we just say that you're gonna look at this, or do you guys wanna just remove this row? Or just say in here per Title V, like, what would you like to do? And why are we referencing building code?
As it defines habitable or occupiable space, I think. Which allows us to include things like 3-season porches and.
So we don't care about that, is that correct, is that
It
fair,
depends
is that what
if-
everybody's
Depends if we
saying?
wanna rewrite it or eliminate it to be. Consistent with Title V, I suppose.
Right.
So habitable or occupiable space as defined by Title V?
Or do we just wanna strike it and just be Title V?
I mean,
I would go for the latter,
Yeah.
what Thor is suggesting.
like, as an example, unless there's some reason, and everybody should feel good about this, like, yeah, I feel really good about this is a waste of time, whenever we talk about it, we never care about it. Title V is being met, that's all that matters, like, if that's going through your heads, then we shouldn't have it.
We always grant, even for new construction, like I remember 91 Wigger Street, they had the foundation was raised because they're building on piers, but they're within 20 feet and none of us even batted an eye at it because we're like, why does it matter?
Well, it does matter, because it's like currently
Right,
called
it's
out, yeah.
exactly, but that's my point is, let's change it to just be Title V.
Alright, so all in favor of striking?
Yes.
Okay, woo, didn't that feel good? Okay. Alright, what about the next one, accessory buildings containing habitable occupiable space? All setbacks to be measured, again, it's the same, it's a little less than before, 10 feet. Do you care about an accessory building? Or does Title V already cover an accessory building?
Not like sheds or, I don't think they discuss sheds.
Yeah, they don't, and that's not in the current reg, right? That's something you're in the draft, so that, I think that's new wording. I don't think that's currently in 2.1.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Accessory building?
Yeah,
Yeah.
all we did was move the table up, we didn't add anything, we kind
I
of rewrite this
apologize,
one.
okay, I apologize.
Again, if this is protective of the field, and you don't have anything Title V protecting the field, then that would be important, right? To maintain.
I'm thinking about, two things, I'm thinking about accessory buildings and the potential for it becoming a habitable space, under, the other thing I'm thinking about is an accessory building, drainage off the roof going on to the soil absorption system. So I'm thinking about those two things, and it's.
And if Title V doesn't cover it, then you need to protect for it, which makes perfect
Right,
sense.
yeah,
So that means that when you see this in a variance request, this would be you want to know about that. So
yeah,
is that something that we can put language around in the
I don't
regulation?
know.
Or is that something that you'd want to see?
Well, those are the two concerns that I would have. I'm open as to suggestions as to how to remedy that, but.
Can you just repeat your concerns again? One is rainwater runoff?
One would be runoff from the surface of the roof. And the second one would be that somebody, you might turn that into a habitable space.
And
Oh, it's the Coast Guard station, it's the end of the day.
I can hear it every day. I hear it every morning, so well, I'm not anymore, because I'm at work, but. it's- Okay. So for that reason, you,
Yeah,
so,
yeah, they plan.
Colors.
mhm.
At the end of every day.
Is there any other conditions that you guys can think of?
I can't think of any others, but those are the two that would come to my mind.
It was funny, this one came up for me because there was a building permit for someone to put a sauna almost on top of there. And I didn't bring it before the board because it's like, this is a sauna, it's not really technically a habitable space, like they're in there for 15 minutes.
But they're hanging out, it's fresh on the field too, right? Aren't you?
Well, it's, yeah, but it was like, it wasn't on the field, it was just within the 10 feet.
Okay,
And it was on cinder blocks and movable.
The other thing is, in case a repair needs to be made, you need to
This
have
is
some,
important too,
right,
yeah.
yeah,
to
you
have the
need to
setback.
have some setback in order to be able to access.
yeah, so again, Title V already accommodates that setback, right? And except in the case of this accessory building, they don't talk about it.
Right,
So now we're protecting ourselves, so I'm gonna add that one here.
right.
Okay. So anything else in here? Water well, I know that our well regulations seem to be dramatically bigger than others, so then what Title V says, is there content with this one? And again, I'm just pushing on you guys to say like, you know what, when somebody asks me for a variance from this, I'm gonna say no. Unless like it's huge, if there's like this inability to move forward.
My experience has been that there were some areas where, particularly sandy soils and stuff like that, where 150 feet, is very justifiable. But there are other places where you have compact soils, where, is overkill. But that's, my experience and what, I have, I know that there's been some, problems with properties along Atlantic Street, with the well water testing, because of setbacks and things like that. And hopefully the new water line will.
I heard somebody make an argument about downgrade and upgrade for wells, which I didn't think was relevant because it's a well, but is that a thing? Like, is it a distance? Is it a vertical lift? Does that have a fact? Does that play a role?
I think it depends on, like, when we're not gonna know the answer, but what's going on underground, like, are they pulling from the same aquifer?
You have to test, do we test it?
Yeah, I mean, but
We don't know.
many of these arguments were made because of the geology of Cape Ann.
Absolutely.
I think the 150 is.
Where's your water source? Well, it's empty, so I don't know where it's coming from.
Like, how frequently are you giving variances to that well setback? I mean, 50 Hilltop had.
15
all-
Hilltop's a great example.
3. But like, again, we're just gonna say, if you're within 150 feet, you have to do advanced treatment, nitrogen removal.
Yeah. So
And
why
if
don't
you
we-
construct-
But now our regs do require testing. Right, just to remind everyone of the section that we went through, that if you are within 150 feet, we're now requiring testing of the neighbor's wells.
Yeah.
But they could ask for a variance of that.
But that's where we have to say no variance will be
But,
granted. If
yeah.
that's something that we feel strongly about, we can put in our
You need for
regulations,
new
no variance will be
construction,
granted.
Or just for any of
For
it,
new
like,
construction.
Yeah,
Right, for new construction, yeah, but for, let's say somebody, was going to do an upgrade or something and it was compact soils or something. And we require people to do, testing of the wells, we could grant them a variance of that, if, say it was outside 100.
But our regulation, and I just wanna be clear, when we're changing all these, they say for variance to be granted, it has to be manifestly unjust. So,
For new construction,
yes.
right,
So if it's
Actually,
or for
any
anything
variance,
with the
any
wells.
variance, yeah.
For any
Even for
variance.
local upgrades, if we can scroll back up to the wells section, but you'd have to grant a variance for the well testing that we added, cause we added a whole new section based. Just based for well testing of abutters,
Yes.
I'm sorry,
that,
gotta go down.
Would it be helpful if there was a section on upgrades and a section on new construction?
I think so.
Yeah.
I really
like
think so,
that.
because we're trying, like, I've noticed that there's nothing in here on new construction. We only start to talk about it in variances, and I really feel like that would be a great idea.
I like that idea.
Like, just table it out, be like, here's the registration.
You're shooting yourself in the foot, because if the average person can read this, Dan.
They still don't trust themselves. It's like, I can do my taxes, but I still pay for an accountant.
Yeah,
Here,
so
He holds your
right there
hand,
at
too.
4.8, we go into it, so you'd have to draft a variance against that setback. I think this kind of protects and proves whether or not, you're impacting someone's well. Because we're requiring testing.
Boxford actually does that. If you have a less than 5-minute per inch perk rate, you have to be 150 feet from wetlands and wells. If it's over that, then it's 100.
Yeah, which
so
makes
that's
sense to me.
that's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
good.
I mean, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
They got a lot more dirt in Boxford than they do on Cape Ann though.
They do,
Yeah,
right.
Which makes a big difference for the treatability of all these systems.
Yes.
Because we're constantly making reductions for the amount of soil that's underneath our systems.
Do we control things like fluoride in well water?
so we have well regulations that we're gonna be looking at, after we get through these and updating them, because there's some state guidelines that we want to be adopting. That we're not currently managing into at all.
Most people, for well water, just take fluoride tablets.
So resource
Which they
areas,
shouldn't do.
It's a matter of opinion.
No, because it's, no, it's because there's already a high fluoride level because of the source of the water.
Right, it all depends on I think water changes quite a bit from.
Yeah, so taking too much fluoride is
Right, is bad for you.
bad,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. I announced that everybody should be taking children.
So, we did adjust the land subject to coastal flowage.
all right, so
Which we
now I
talked
just want to
about.
throw this out here. It's 150 feet, and it's 3.5 feet. We should say no.
What's
Like
the
that-
hit? I'm sorry, I didn't follow.
So
that.
it's so we're in a velocity zone, right, floodway, land subject of, coastal storm flowage, whatever. This is 200 feet width away, or an elevation of 4 feet above the AE and the BE. So if it's only 3 feet, they come to us and they say it's 3 feet elevation from AE and BE, and it's 150 feet. You guys should say no.
Well, they should come before us if it's.
No, but I mean,
If
the
it-
purpose of the regulation is that people are really clear on what's possible. So like, if right now you're saying that this is the regulation, and like, what would be the instance when it's 150 feet and 3.5 feet, and you would say yes? Like, why would you say yes if our regulation is 204?
You're talking about new construction, right? Like,
Yes, I am talking about new construction. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, because again, an existing upgrade or a repair, we have to work with what we got. I get that.
What was
So-
it,
But
one
this is for-
56 at Atlantic? Was
Oh, yeah,
new
yeah.
construction, and it was outside the, all the buffers and things like that, but it was like a very flat area, and it was like 1 foot,
oh, yeah,
right, above, the land subject to coastal storm flowage,
Mhm.
right.
and pervious soils. I mean, that bugged the heck out of me, that one. And then we had another one,
So that was voted, it was a yes?
They withdrew, I think.
they withdrew,
No,
right, and then there was another one,
well, isn't that what you want to have happen?
yeah, we would want
Yeah.
that to happen, right?
Okay, good.
Right.
That means the regulation's doing its job. Yes,
Right, and then we had another one on Causeway Street.
Yes, yeah.
Right, where what they were proposing, actually, the bottom of the system would have been in the flood zone. And they were proposing to build like a flood wall, around the system. Stuff like that, we discouraged the guy, but there were other variances that they wanted on
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah.
And they withdrew.
the main thing is I just want to pressure test that we're feeling really good about what it says, so that we're not feeling like, oh, let's just go think about it. We should,
I think, yeah, you're right, because if it's a variance, we shouldn't ever feel like we have to grant it for new construction. I kind of agree, like, it's supposed to be manifestly
regulation.
unjust, like,
yeah.
unless there's no use of the property.
That's right, like, that's really important in our regulations today,
That's-
manifestly
that's what it
unjust means that
says.
there's no other use of the property. Right, so that means like I wanna go put 10 houses on it, but I could put one and it'd be fine, it's not manifestly unjust.
Exactly.
Right, like, and that, so that's an example of us all being okay with that and saying like, those two conditions haven't been met.
That's big noise.
Right, and that's why I want, and I'm really not, I don't wanna come across as having an opinion, I wanna come across as being consistent and defensible, right? And so I'm really pushing on these to be sure that you guys are saying like, you know what, it would have to be a big exception here in new construction for me to ever say, okay, like there's this random pocket of beautiful soil on the very edge of the, wind sheet somewhere, and so maybe then, it would be a different story. So, but other than that, I feel like we should feel really good about being able to say no. Not because we don't wanna, work with people, but because we have to be doing our job of protecting, our environs and all that other
I
stuff.
was always a fan of Nancy Reagan, so I can
Oh,
say
do I sound
no.
like Nancy Reagan? Oh,
Let's say
no.
no.
She's like the root of so much substance abuse disorder in this world. No, I'm not Nancy Reagan, I'll say that.
People drank because of her.
No. I don't want that to be the case.
I think that makes sense. I don't know, 4 feet, I don't know. I guess that makes some sense, but we'd probably want to add the same language for the septic tanks from maybe the inlet and outlet inverts.
Where are we here?
For the column to the
It's
left.
just right next to what you've highlighted.
Oh, this guy.
You've got 100 feet.
Yeah, so we could run into a situation where they don't meet. They meet that for the field, but not for the tank. Just within 100 feet.
Okay,
But you don't want 4 feet for the septic
What do you want?
inverts, you're,
I don't know. 2 feet,
I mean. Title V calls out a foot, right?
so is there a reason that we're going beyond Title V?
No, Title V calls out a foot for groundwater. I'm saying not for elevation, so I feel like if Title V is calling out a foot for
Ah.
the height that they'd like the inverts above groundwater as a foot, then, I mean, I don't,
Yeah, makes sense,
I'm on
makes sense.
spitballing.
right, you're following that, makes sense, yeah.
Yeah,
Well-
instead of like arbitrarily being
Yeah.
like 2,
Yeah.
2 sounds like a good number. I think 1 foot is what Title V uses, so let's just use 1 foot.
Right, but 1 is the loneliest number.
It's true.
Maybe we should do 2 then.
It's just a sound one.
And I think, I can't remember why we landed on 4 feet, but Tony might have had some input on that.
I had some input on that, because that's what Title V says from the bottom of the system, just using the groundwater,
Okay,
that's why.
Alright.
we're following the same logic.
So resource coastal
Right.
areas,
So I think for repairs though, there's a chance that could need to be reduced, but I suppose that could be discussed.
well, again, let's write it now for new construction, and
Yeah.
we'll add a section,
Yeah, right.
we'll take homework to add some way of distinguishing between new construction and, I think that would be really helpful throughout the whole thing, like just have 2 columns right next to every regulation or whatever.
I think
Okay.
that's a good way of handling it, yeah, columns, right?
Yep,
So can I chime in on coastal resource areas?
sure.
So on both the one above it and that one, I don't know why there's a setback to tanks. I mean, I do know back in 1970, whatever, when this setback was adopted, tanks were not made like they're made now. I
Mhm.
think there's very little public health or environmental risk associated with tanks today. So personally, I think the 50-foot that's in Title V is sufficient. I'm not advocating necessarily changing the soil absorption system setback, but just the tank. I don't think Gloucester needs a specific tank setback. The other thing that's really confusing is coastal resource areas and the Gloucester regulations are broader than they are in Title V, and that should be made clear. And Cody just gave the example of a designer who's not familiar with the Gloucester regulations and didn't understand that. So that should be made
Well,
clear.
Finish your sentence, please.
No, it just should be made clear. There's a list of wetlands in Title V.
Yes.
Under the state code, the wetlands that are regulated under the Gloucester Board of Health regulations is much longer.
I see.
So
So you think we should add the list directly in here instead of just referring to the wetland ordinances, is that?
I think it'd be a lot
Yeah.
cleaner.
Yes.
Yeah,
If we're going to keep them, yes.
right.
the Gloucester wetland regs, refer to 310 CMR 10. Which does list, things like coastal dunes and things like that. Land subject to coastal dune flowage, isolated land subject to flooding, certain things that Title V doesn't necessarily spell out.
Right, that's what I'm saying, that's why people like, the most recent example Cody gave, people don't follow that or understand that.
But I mean, the only downside to us creating a list here is that if conservation changes their list, we're not gonna be
Now we can say.
potentially
Yeah, we can
in
still
line.
reference
say, yeah,
conservation
still
definition,
reference.
yeah, I think that's
So
very
list them all
important.
out that they are now, and they, yeah, and then the others in the Gloucester Wetlands Ordinance,
Okay,
which also
Like,
include the
I'm just adding a
ACDC.
definite, we'll put a definition in our definition so that it'll be,
okay.
all right.
One of the things that Conservation Commission is dealing with is the, at the last meeting, it was dealt with very well by your board. A small area of isolated wetland that not necessarily met the state definition, but met the local definition of a water body that was looked at. So that's one of the things that, you know, the Conservation Commission is dealing with now.
Right.
But it was dealt with well by Williams, I think.
I don't know which one that is.
It was on Hesper's Ave.
Oh, okay. Doesn't ring a bell, honestly.
So,
Sorry to not be able.
And then to go back to Dan's original comment about reducing the setback for watertight tanks to Title V's requirement of 50 feet versus 100. Your thoughts on that?
go with Title V.
I'm comfortable with that.
So
So we're
that,
deleting these?
that changes to 50 feet.
We
And then
don't
Or
really have
just-
to state
Just
something.
delete it, if you're gonna be consistent with Title
Oh,
V.
right.
Yeah, Title V, and delete it.
Gotcha.
And then I'll add one more observation on coastal resource areas and then stop throwing bombs into your meeting, but this is contrary to what you all were saying a half an hour ago, but to me, a coastal dune is incredibly environmentally sensitive for putting a house or something else there, but whether it's septic tank effluent or treated effluent, I don't think it much matters. I don't think septic tank effluent is going to pose a greater public health or environmental risk to that dune versus treated
What
effluent.
about people swimming on the other side of that dune?
Title,
Right, I think the odds of a public health problem associated with a dune are very slight. I think the public health problems associated with a lot of other resource areas are real. I don't see that, personally, I don't see that in the dune.
Well, in sand, if there's a lot of, and this is one of the things I wanted to bring up later, because Coffin's Beach wasn't added, to the list of areas for nitrogen. If nitrogen isn't treated, essentially everything flows towards Ipswich Bay. And it goes like in a pulse, because when the tide comes in, everything's sort of blocked up. And then so you get this big flush of nitrogen, and nitrogen has been shown to be the main contributor to harmful algal blooms, such as red tide,
Right.
which impacts public health. So in that instance, I see there is a nexus.
but if we have a system that's designed in compliance with Title V, let's say for new construction, with a secondary treatment unit, aren't we presuming that it protects public health?
But
environment?
Dan, aren't you saying that you don't think a secondary
Yeah, I'm
treatment
not
unit
sure
is
if-
necessary?
Right, I know, we,
Okay.
right.
He's saying he doesn't think it's necessary,
Like how?
but he would agree with,
Yeah.
that I think it is necessary
Okay,
in that instance. That's just my,
And I think to further Dan's point, I think we want to be careful with the coastal resource areas too, because if we're keeping a 200-foot setback to leaching facilities within all of areas around Wingershik Beach and other parts of Gloucester, that means this board has granted variances to that very often in the past. And we're saying if it doesn't meet that for new construction, it can never happen.
That's right, that's how you should feel.
And so we
You
should feel,
so
so
good
we
about
should
this law,
feel
it should
good
not
about
happen.
this, that
Yeah,
we don't have to look at it on a case by case basis. And I could see both sides, like I know that's what the board's done historically and.
well, we should
But if we're following.
I mean, you can still hear the variance request and there
Right,
could be a circumstance that
Right,
is presented to you that, you know, changes your mind, but these regulations, you guys should be feeling so good about these regulations that a person should feel hard pressed to ask for a variance because it makes.
And we're
perfect
talking
sense.
about new construction, we're not talking
Right.
about
and like,
local.
to me, like, if you're 200 feet from coastal bank, you shouldn't not be able to build a house there. You know, even if you're, don't have a dune, like there's areas on Magnolia that have big coastal banks that, you know, why are we requiring them to get a variance to this if it's Title V is not having a setback to it, but we're saying it should be 200 feet away? It seemed, you know, and I'm not saying that's should govern our decision, but
Right.
it's something to think about.
To his point, coastal banks are broken up into two general areas. One is sediment producing, and in that instance, our setbacks make sense.
Mhm.
But when it's prevention from storm, where it's a ledge.
Yeah.
You know, we need to maybe make that less, you know, the setback to to a coastal bank. Because it's not likely that,
So that means that if we had the 200 feet here, and somebody came to you and they didn't have the ledge, you would say no. But if they did have the ledge, you might say yes.
it depends, if it's a sediment producing, you know, coastal bank. Then you wanna make sure that, because a lot of that sediment can wash away. And, you know, it's not going to be protected as much. But if it's a ledge, if it's a land, you know, that's different, you know, for the setback, you know, you wanna make sure that what's within the buffer. And it's 100-foot buffer for wetlands, for coastal bank. And so in my mind, it would make sense to have the 100-foot for instance for ledge to, you know, be with fall in line with, you know, the wetland. What do you think?
We're so 100 feet for what is
From
that?
a coastal bank, if it's.
Oh, right, so the wetlands.
So we have this one
Protection
category here,
Act.
which is resource area. We don't have, unless I'm missing it here. Am I missing wetlands?
Well, it's another term for wetlands.
Freshwater resource area.
Resource
Yeah, that's what I'm
area
saying.
is-
So resource area, we have this 200 feet and you're just saying there would be a,
Well, we were making distinctions between different coastal resource areas and
should we break out the coastal resource areas into different types or?
well, we were bringing out that coastal dunes, if you have a pre-treatment device, you know, that would be automatically approved, but I'm wondering if you say for instances of a coastal bank, you know, if it's not a sediment producing coastal bank, that the setback should be 100 feet. What do you think, Dan?
I don't even think it should be 100 for, it's not sediment producing personally, but. Cause I don't think Title V has a setback for coastal bank either,
Right, it does not,
like, cause it's not, I don't know,
right.
it's a rock.
Does Title V care about all issues, public health though, or are they only caring about? Shall we clarify sediment producing or not?
Title V in its preamble says that you should read the Wetland Protection Act, so there really is a nexus to it, you know, it's.
Yeah,
Clean water,
yeah.
clean water, yeah.
So are you guys thinking that even, so for Thor, are you thinking that even for like a sediment bank that you wouldn't need a setback?
I think that's what Dave said makes some sense,
Just keep the 200
well, what would be,
for sediment producing.
oh, for sediment producing, okay.
yeah.
So if it's sediment producing is 200, if not,
It's ledge.
You're right, yeah, if it's essentially ledge, yeah.
So these definitions are not debatable, like this is
well,
a
I'm
ledge.
gonna
no,
add
this
it in
isn't.
up top.
They're debatable in certain instances, and it requires somebody versed in that to tell you.
Is there actually a spot we can look up for a sediment producing coastal bank? Like, cause if we have ledge, but we have 4 feet on top of ledge. Or 4 feet of soil on top of ledge, is that sediment producing or not sediment producing?
I would argue no.
In which
If-
case would you have enough is it because of the type of soil you're saying no, or because there's not enough soil?
Because it's been developed,
Yeah,
filled, it's not acting as, it's not feeding the dunes or the beach with sediment. And that's, it's really more of a Wetlands Protection Act thing.
Okay,
Maybe we can look at how it defines it there, but that's generally the idea, is like the coastal bank is an active entity that's going to erode and move around over time,
okay.
and we want to kind of protect that.
And well, there's a septic system that might be in that. So
But if you have a lot has a house on it, it's got fill or lawn, it may be a relic. Potentially was at one point, but it's not functioning.
Well, when those lawns erode back down into the coastal bank,
well,
like they do around,
well,
like areas of like the back shore, like East Gloucester and. Magnolia, where like you get enough wave action on those big storms to move sediment off the banks, right? There's a lot of homes out there that lose their yard and then they bring it back.
You sure do. But what he said is that if you are sediment producing, we're keeping it at 200.
Yeah,
If it's not sediment producing as defined by the definition we're gonna put up there, it would be ledge, we could say, or if it is ledge.
you're
You
saying
need a
there's no
certain amount of
setback.
ledge.
no,
That's, I'm just trying to figure out the like. I wouldn't, so I'm just trying to make sure that when we define out non-sediment producing bank,
We could
coastal
also just
bank.
clarify it in our
Okay.
variances, right? So we have a section called variances and we can just clarify what we're looking for. To have an approvable variance against a resource area. You know, rather than trying to change the setback, we can just say, if you're gonna
okay,
come before us, you know,
Right,
we're gonna be
sure.
looking at, you know, sediment producing or not.
Right.
As a criteria that you have to be able to define in order
Okay.
to get a variance on it. Is that,
Just feel like it can be, like, if we don't put a definition in, it's
no, I'm
gonna
gonna put a
end
definition
up
for
being
sediment
subjective.
producing. Yeah,
for
but I'm,
sediment producing.
yeah, so like in a variance, you have to demonstrate like or equal, you have to be manifestly unjust, and in this case, it's gonna be an and. You have to prove that this coastal bank is not sediment producing, right?
right. And I want to say that the instances you brought up with the back shore, those areas would be in a flood zone.
Right, I guess so.
You're right.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, the only thing you're trying to protect is like someone's leaching field getting too close and getting washed in. But in that case, you'd be in a flood zone anyway, so you're protected by that other 100-foot buffer is what you're saying. So we're kind of like, by doing a coastal bank. You're kind of doubling down.
Well, there's overkill, you know,
Gotcha.
when it's ledge and you want a 200-foot setback.
Okay,
So.
I mean, I would love to be able to demonstrate to designers that we've really thought about what comes before us, and these regulations are reflective of our local area and
Right.
realistic. So what, you know, I don't mind making the variance language more complex. if we
And the
can-
reason why I'm saying 100 is because that's the setback for wetlands. And so therefore it's consistent with the wetland setback. You know, for even if it's ledge.
Under the wetlands regulations.
Right, yeah.
They don't say 100 feet to leaching fields.
No, but that's the zone of jurisdiction.
Yes.
Right,
of the
it's a 100-foot
Conservation
buffer.
Commission.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm saying 100,
Right.
because then if you meet it with us and you meet it with Concom, you know, it's less bureaucracy.
But as Thor said, it's not, with Conscom, you can be 50 feet from the top of a coastal bank. There's not a prohibition, right?
Right,
It's just
it's a buffer zone.
a buffer
Yes,
zone,
right.
right? This would be a prohibition.
Right.
Well, I took us down a rabbit hole, sorry.
But we shouldn't look at the quantity of what we get done, but the quality
Yeah, exactly.
of what we're getting done.
I do have to leave in like 5 minutes.
Okay, must
Speaking
clarify,
of
so we
quality.
guys will finish this last one for variances to coastal research, the variance request must clarify. Sediment producing.
I guess that's why.
Yeah.
What I would love is if you all could, in your free time, go through this again and, add in other comments that you're, you know, like keep reading it and synthesizing. If you're seeing something that's not paying out, like we just talked about, like making sure we have for new construction versus, upgrade or repair. And then we can continue next time. going, starting after section 7. That's what I would do. Is there anything that we could be doing better to make these move along a little bit more effectively? It's hard for us all to get together. That's my challenge. We really want to be able to. I'm feeling this drive to make these happen because it's difficult right now to manage the volume of work that's coming through. So I'd really like to make these realistic. More availability.
Next week's very good for me, but
Yeah.
after that, it isn't for quite a while.
Yeah, because we wanted to bring finished goods before the board in 2 weeks and it's not looking good right now. The amount of time it's taking us. And I agree with you, quality is much more important than speed,
Right.
100%. But is there any other suggestions about how we can work more effectively here? I'm wide open to suggestions. If something's working for you or not, let me know.
If you brought snacks.
Okay, that I'm pretty good at.
Snacks.
No, I will bring snacks, no problem.
I mean, we've gone through and done track changes. Oh, you have something in?
I have one idea. If you're worried about the volume coming in, maybe on a temporary basis, separate out new construction from upgrades. And upgrades do some type of solution where just the health department reviews it, it looks relatively copacetic. And then you endorse it, and you do that for like maybe just 6 months or something while you work on these regulations. But even during that time period, if someone's doing new construction, then it would come before.
So you're
the
saying
sep-
do a first iteration of updates only on new construction? Because right now our laws don't allow us to do that.
I'm
right?
saying this is really complex stuff. It's gonna be a while till it's done right.
Yeah.
And if you're worried about managing workload, an idea may not be, well, one idea is to say, all right, if somebody's proposing new construction, it follows the same path it is now, it goes to the septic review subcommittee. If someone's proposing an upgrade, just temporarily, to relieve the staff burden, don't.
Oh, it's
and-
not that. It's the burden of all of our laws say one thing and people are doing the other. And so and our laws say one thing and people are doing the other, and then that's leading to variance requests. So no matter what it be, the
Right, so-
volume of, I thought what you were saying was like, let's just do a first round of handling it only for any change for local, for
Oh, for
upgrades.
upgrades, that's another
And then now we
possibility,
can
that
sort
would,
of,
that,
kind
I
of
didn't even think
tackle
of
that and
yeah,
then do new construction separately.
yeah,
That might be a path.
that might be a path that's,
So we would do one round of approvals, kind of relieving some of the pain and suffering for upgrade and repair. And then we could do the more, the next round of updates on new construction.
Are we concerned about the ongoing precedent setting of?
Very.
So the longer we leave the new construction unresolved, the more
Yes.
variances and the more precedent is set. And we're not getting control over.
I don't think any additional precedent, using more like I don't know if the
Yes.
board is doing precedent setting still.
I mean, our regulations right now have been written this way for quite a while, and the board has been making decisions. And if, a designer is gonna come in and say like, why is that person getting a yes and I'm getting a no? We can say, yes, it's a case by case basis, but there could be commonality. So I think our regulations are a point where we can, say this is how we're gonna operate from this point forward. So I'm feeling pressure on new construction for sure to help be clear. And again, the goal being get rid of stuff that's frivolous, right? That's, people are having to do variance requests and we're always granting them. Versus like things that are really important, making sure we're feeling really good about saying no. Like if it's in defiance of what we wrote here, we should feel really good about saying no because we all believe in what we wrote.
We need consistency.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and defensibility is also very important. So,
so you had developed this consent agenda concept, I think it was before Dominique and Cody and Gabby were here, right? And that was where the staff said, we think this, this, and this, and you just kind of blazed.
that
through
wasn't
it.
written down anywhere though, except in our own heads.
I
And so,
understand, but for
yeah.
the next 6 months, if you think about, just an idea, continuing that. So it frees everybody in this room up, so you have time to really spend on that. That's just an idea.
thank you for that.
Yeah.
Those things cause problems because not everybody's aware of them. like the team that was in the room when those decisions were made was aware of them, but they weren't ever published out to everybody. So the rest, the designers that were in there getting a decision knew about it, but not everybody knew about it. So that's why we want to get all those into the agenda, I mean, into the regulations now, as one example. But that is a great suggestion of how we could operate temporarily. But if you guys, thank you for the suggestions and we'll take it under advisement, and we just have to make it a priority as well. I was thinking like, you know, could we divide it up into sections so that, you know, like maybe Dave, you take nitrogen and work with Cody on nitrogen, you know, and so you've got you in here making that happen, and then, you know, Thor, you take, you know.
Oxygen.
Yeah, but you know, just so that we have the expertise guiding us and we can move it along so that we can bring more finished goods to the room. You know, with knowing that the subject matter expertise has really been focusing on this is, that's something I was thinking of, so that we could meet more frequently with you as individuals and then bring sort of the end result forward. Does that sound interesting or?
Or you could just hope the ground freezes soon.
Yeah. Yeah, all right. All right, we'll give, thank you so much for the time. Thor, I'll put it back to you though.
Alright. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I will second.
Oh,
All in favor, do we just have all in favor? All in favor, Thor, yes?
No, we forgot to complain to the board.
yeah, I forgot concerns of the board. But,
Did you already vote?
Yes.
Thank you.
the only thing I wanted to bring up afterwards, can I bring up anything now or no?
Not officially.
Okay, so unofficially, there is no November septic review committee because of Thanksgiving. And so anyone coming forward with applications are going to have to wait until December 19th
Can you hang up?
for review.
So we wanted to see if you guys want to have another,
And I can send an email out
Okay.
to this effect,
Sometimes
so.
you can
That's an
just stick
operational
one-
consideration.
just stick one in.
hey, thank you, Marco. Thank you, Thor.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, I was gonna grab something.
So you want to gather the turkeys in November, right?
I mean, we have a Board of Health meeting, yeah, there you go, we have a Board of Health meeting, that's, you know, soon in November.
What is it?
I
The
can-
14th,
Okay,
14th.
so maybe we just bring any septic things forward in that one.
so we can either bring the septic things forward in that one, or we could meet on a non-Thursday. At some other time.
If you guys felt it relevant.
I think though, the only we only have. The only other applicant is 91 who wasn't heard tonight, that should be home, so.
That was the question, what's in the queue, you know?
So yeah, so there's that in the queue, and then there's a